Friends, so let's continue our discussion on thermal expansion, particularly where we left off. So in the previous lecture, we saw how we can define the thermal expansion, what are the ways to quantify it. Now we extended that understanding to from one-dimensional system to two-dimensional system, and after getting acquainted with expressing the coefficient or expressing the change in the dimension with increase in the temperature, we wanted to see the theoretical reason for why such behavior is exhibited by a system when you rise the temperature. We saw that this stems from the atomistic level, meaning when you looked into the interaction between two atoms, we saw that the potential energy, because of the positions of the atoms, it was not symmetric, rather it was asymmetric, and this was primarily because the force of attraction was a long range force and the force of repulsion was a short range one, and this allowed atoms, when they vibrate, to move farther from each other when you compared their movements towards each other. So this means that when you extrapolate this understanding of atoms moving away from each other at a particular temperature, this translated into what we refer to as thermal expansion. So in this initial stages of the lecture, let's try to relate the coefficient of thermal expansion, or try to understand how the thermal expansion changes with the increase in temperature. So when you rise the temperature of the material, in addition to the change in the dimension of the material, how the factor that relates the change in the dimension of the material to the rise in temperature, this factor, this coefficient, how it changes, how in itself changes with increase in temperature, is what we will be looking into in this initial stages of the lecture. So now let us go back to our expression for the thermal expansion. We saw that dL by L naught is equal to alpha delta T. So this was our initial expression for the thermal expansion involving a one-dimensional system. Now let us stick to it. Now let us assume the change in the temperature is quite small. So we can write this delta T in terms of dt. So that would mean that dL by L naught, which is the initial length, is equal to the product of coefficient of thermal expansion and the change in the temperature. Now this coefficient of thermal expansion, based on the relation, can be expressed as something like this, something that rather 1 by L naught and the product of dL by dt. So what we have done is we have just expressed the coefficient of thermal expansion as the change in the length with respect to that of the temperature and brought the constant out. Now using our understanding of multivariable calculus, fret not, you can just look into the expression I'm about to write, and then you can get a fair understanding of what I'm doing here. So this can be written as So what I'm doing is I'm rewriting the change in the length of a system with respect to the change in temperature by introducing the internal energy into it, meaning the change in the length of the system with respect to the change in the internal energy of the system, and I'm also considering the change in the internal energy of the system with respect to change in the temperature of the system. So instead of directly relating temperature to the length, I'm relating temperature to the change in the internal energy of the system here, and then I'm relating that change in the internal energy to the change in length here. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just rewriting the change in the length of the system to the change in the temperature by including the internal energy term here. So now for this argument, I'll just leave the first term here, and now let's go back to our fundamental understanding, or the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, you could, if you could see here, you can relate this this to the first law of thermodynamics. Now how can we do that? Now in the first law of thermodynamics, we saw that the change in the internal energy of the system is nothing but the change in the heat fed into the system and the work done by the system. This is the first law of thermodynamics. Now assuming that there is no work done by the system, then what you would end up with is something like this. Now when you replace the internal energy with the heat here, so we have an expression that is something like this, and when you replace the internal energy with the heat here, what this ultimately gives you is the heat capacity at constant volume. And now we can express this dL by dt as dL by dt as dL by dou L by dou u and Cv. So what we have done is we have expanded our understanding or the expression of change in length with respect to the temperature by including internal energy. So by including internal energy, this is expressed as this. We have now, instead of length and temperature, we have length, internal energy and temperature. Now this internal energy, what we have done is we have assumed that there is no work done by the system. So we have gotten rid of this PdV term. There is no change in the volume. So what we then have done is we have related the internal energy to the heat, and once when we do that, we end up with the coefficient or the heat capacity of the system at constant volume. So when you substitute this in the expression above, so what you would ultimately observe is the coefficient of thermal expansion is equal to 1 by L naught dL by du Cv. So let me, for your understanding, rewrite it here. So what we saw is the coefficient of thermal expansion is nothing but dL by dt, or rather dL by dt. Now we introduced the internal energy to it. Forgive me for my clumsiness. So we have introduced the internal energy to it. So that means we have this expression. And now we know that this is equal to specific heat at constant volume, assuming that there is no work done on the system and the heat is input into the system, thereby causing a change in temperature. So that means you have your heat capacity here at constant volume. So ultimately what you would end up with is this alpha, or the coefficient of thermal expansion, is nothing but 1 by L naught dou L by dou u Cv. Now this heat capacity is dependent on temperature, or with temperature this heat capacity would vary. So when you include the dependence of temperature of the heat capacity, then the expression will translate into something like this. Now, like I said in the previous lecture, we will not be proceeding further, but what I wanted to get into, or what I wanted to say in this, or the way I would want to express the relation between temperature and the coefficient of thermal expansion is in this manner. That is, when we rewrite the expression for thermal expansion, we can arrive at an expression for coefficient of thermal expansion. And based on that expression, which is shown here, based on that expression, when we introduce internal energy, we can express this, or we can expand this expression in this manner. And by introducing the internal energy, we can translate, or we can again introduce the heat capacity into the formulation. And once we have introduced the heat capacity at the constant volume in this formulation, now the way the thermal expansion or the coefficient of thermal expansion changes with temperature will be similar to that of the way in which the heat capacity at the constant volume would change. So the change in the coefficient of thermal expansion with the change in the temperature just reflects the change in the heat capacity at constant volume with the change in the temperature. So this is how far we can get into the dependence of thermal expansion and the temperature in this lecture, or the relation between thermal expansion and the temperature in this lecture will be stopped in this place, wherein we have arrived at a relation which shows that the influence of temperature on the coefficient of thermal expansion is nothing but the reflection of the influence of temperature on the specific heat, or the heat capacity, rather the heat capacity of the material at constant volume. Now, depending on how the heat capacity of a material changes with the temperature, in the same manner, or in the change in the coefficient of thermal expansion would also follow the same trend. The heat capacity follows with the increase in the temperature. So if one wants to know further, they can then focus on change in the heat capacity with the temperature and then relate that back to the change in the coefficient of thermal expansion. So this is like I said in the previous lecture, I will not be digging deep into it to give a definite expression, and that would be well beyond the scope of this work or this particular course, and I don't want to dig deep into it. If in the further discussions, if you want me to give a specific expressions, if you are interested in it, maybe I can guide you to the right places, or I can myself derive it and talk about it. This can be done in the subsequent lectures if you have time, but so far, I wanted to stop here by deriving at this relation, and based on this relation one can understand how the temperature influences the coefficient of thermal expansion. So now let's proceed and try to build on our understanding of thermal expansion, and based on that, let's get into the other property of the material. Now we have seen that the coefficient of thermal expansion, or the thermal expansion as behavior alone, is because of asymmetry in the interaction potential between the atoms. So allow me to plot it again, since it is a critical part. We would have to plot it over and over again. So we have the interaction potential that is not symmetric in nature. So we have an interaction potential that is asymmetric or unsymmetric. So we have a positive quadrant and we have a negative quadrant. So this is the interaction between two atoms when you vary its position. And this position, or this the change in the interaction potential with respect to its position, when you plot it, it is not symmetric in nature. So that means the atom is allowed to move a bit farther away from each other when you compare its movement close to each other, and that leads to the thermal expansion, and that is what our understanding was in the previous lecture. Now let us try to translate this interaction potential energy into force that is acting on the atoms. Now ultimately, when you have the interaction potential, it means that it is dependent on the position of the atoms, and this position of the atoms, when they vary, there is a shift in the interaction potential between the atoms, and when there is a shift in the interaction potential, we can then translate that shift to the force that is causing these atoms to move. So let us try to arrive at a plot for the force that is acting on the atoms and force that is acting on the atom with respect to their positions. So from this, let us try to arrive at that. Now, how to define force in relation to the interaction potential is one of the questions that need to be answered. How one can relate force to the interaction potential. Now for that, let's go back to our thermodynamics and try to lend some concepts from there. Now, or try to borrow some concepts from there rather. So what we have is, we have seen that the change in the internal energy of the system, that is a small change in the internal energy of the system, is nothing but, even in this lecture we got into that point, is nothing but the heat fed into the system and the work done by the system. Now when your system is at absolute zero, there is no kinetic energy to the atoms, there is no thermal energy to the atoms, so atoms are sitting in their equilibrium positions. So that would mean that the overall internal energy of the system is confined to their positional potential energy, which we have shown here. When we are close to the absolute zero, or we are close to 0 Kelvin, when there is not much vibrations in the atoms are confined to their equilibrium position, then the internal energy of the system is fully dependent on the positional potential energy of the system, which results from the interaction between the atoms that we have shown here. So that means, then when you substitute this relation here, that means you have the change in the interaction potential of the system is then dependent on the heat fed into the system and the work done by the system. Now assuming that there is no heat that is fed into the system, let's move here, assuming that there is no heat that is fed into the system, then the change in the interaction potential of the system is negative of the work done by the system. Now we need to define what a work is. Now a simpler definition for the work is, now getting back to the Newton's law, the simpler definition for the work is nothing but the product of force and the displacement. So what I mean by that is, if you have a system that is stationary, it is in its place, it is at rest, you apply a force, it moves through some distance, and you call that distance as displacement. Now the product of the force and the displacement is what we call as work. And here let's translate that definition of work. That is, you apply a force to a body at rest, it moves a distance, and you call the product of the force and the displacement is called as work. And now let's translate that to this atomistic scale. There is a force acting on the atom and there is a displacement experienced in the positions of the atom, and now the work done by the atom would be something like this. Similarly, it would be like the product of the force that is acting on the atom and the displacement, that is the distance moved by the atom. So what we ultimately have is, we have now arrived at an expression that relates the interaction potential energy to the force that is acting on a system. Now this the force acting on a force acting on an atom. Now this force acting on an atom can thus be expressed as, when you bring this dr here, is nothing but the change in the interaction potential with the change in the distance between the atom. The force acting on an atom that causes a displacement is nothing but the relation, or it is nothing but the derivative of the first derivative of the interactional potential energy with respect to its position. So that is what we have arrived at from our understanding of the first law of thermodynamics. So we began with considering the interaction potential between two atoms and with respect to its distance, and based on that interaction potential we arrived at the force experienced by the atom, and we saw that force experienced by the atom is the first derivative of the interaction potential with respect to the position of the atom or the distance separating the atoms. Now let us try, instead of deriving furthermore how we can express this force experienced by the atom, let us try to plot this curve of the force experienced by the atoms. Now let us do that in a separate page wherein we have enough space. So for that we need to again consider the interaction potential. By now you should be thorough with plotting this interaction potential. So yeah, let's begin by doing that. We have this curve, the asymmetric one, and we have this interaction potential, the positive quadrant, the negative quadrant, and the distance separating the atoms. And now what we now want to plot is the force experienced by the atom, and this force experienced by the atom, we saw that is nothing, or rather force experienced by the atom is nothing but negative of the first derivative of the interaction potential with respect to the distance. So this we have derived it here using our understanding of the first law of thermodynamics. So we want to plot this. Now this, if you consider it mathematically, it means that this is nothing but the slope of this asymmetric curve. So we have a curve, and the slope of this curve is nothing but the force experienced by the atoms. Oh yes. Now this is the absolute minima of the interaction potential. So that means the slope at this region would be equal to 0. So that is fairly easy for us to plot. So we can bring this here, and since this is nothing but our equilibrium position R0, so at R0 your force experienced by the atoms when they are separated by the equilibrium distance is 0. Now this is rather an asymmetric curve, and here we have a decreasing slope, and you have, since you have a negative sign, this is confined to the positive quadrant. So the region between A to B is confined to the positive quadrant, and now you have a gradual increase in the slope, which then becomes or tends to 0 as the curve becomes smooth. It means that the slope gradually the slope that is gradually decreases and ultimately and eventually becomes 0. The slope that is increasing here gradually decreases and ultimately becomes 0 because of the nature of the curve. So that means that what would happen to the force, that is the slope of the potential energy curve, would be something like this. So what we have done is, we have, from our understanding of the interaction potential energy, we have plotted the force experienced by the atom. Now we have seen the force experienced by the atoms causes a displacement, and we have now plotted the force and the displacement, or the force and the change in the positions of the atom, or how with the change in the position of the atom the force experienced by the atom changes. That is what we have plotted here. It is important to note that there is a negative sign, and that is the reason why we get a plot like this. There is also been textbooks wherein they have ignored this negative sign. Of course, it can be ignored because this comes from our convention of thermodynamics. So this can be removed. People have removed it, and there are textbooks, like I said, wherein this negative sign has been removed. And you get when you remove the negative sign, you get rather a flipped plot of the force curve. But the nature doesn't change, and the purpose of introducing this force will not change even if you don't have this negative sign. But since having a negative sign is easy for us to understand the subsequent discussion, I have used that. So now what we have is, based on the interaction potential between the atoms, which is dependent on the positions of the atoms, we are able to understand or get at a plot which is the force experienced by the atom in relation to the change in the positions of the atom. So you have a change in the positions of the atom, and this position, it corresponds to a force, or the force leads to a change in the position of the atom, and that is what we have plotted here. Now this we can relate it to some behavior that happens at the macroscopic scale. Now the variables we have are the force and the displacements. So variables we have can be translated as the force that we put into the system and change in the position of the atoms. We introduce force to the system, and as a result of the force, there is a change in the position of the system. On the macroscopic scale, we have seen similar behavior, and if you could recollect, we have seen the similar behavior in our load deformation plot. The load, which is nothing but a force that we impose on a system, and in response to this load, what happens is that the dimension of the system changes. This change in the dimension of the system is nothing but movement in the, or shift in the initial positions of the atom. You apply force, there is a shift in the initial positions of the atom, that thereby ultimately leading to the elongation of the overall specimen. So it is easy for us to relate, or we can relate this force plot at the atomistic scale to the load elongation curve at the macroscopic scale, because in the load elongation curve of the macroscopic scale, the same thing happens. The load, which is a force, changes the positions of the atom, thereby increasing the length of the overall length of the specimen. And we are talking about the force at the atomistic scale in this plot. Like here, we are talking about the force, and we have, instead of the overall change in the length, we have the change in the interatomic spaces. Now when the forces that are applied to the system is small, or when the movement on the position of the atoms is small, we are confined to the elastic region. That means this is a linear region, or this relation is rather linear. Let me reiterate, when the movement in the position of the atoms is rather small, that means that whatever we are experiencing, it comes under the elastic region, and that means that there is a linear relation between the load and the elongation. And in this plot, particularly in the elastic region, wherein you have this linear relation, the slope of this curve is referred to as Young's modulus, or this is precisely, or to be more specific, or to be more accurate, this is referred to as stiffness, but we can just divide it by area of cross section here and the original length here. Then it would mean that it would correspond to the Young's modulus. So the slope in the elastic region, when there is a load applied on a system, and there is an elongation that you see when you in this elastic region, in this context of a load and the elongation, and when you then translate the load to stress and the elongation to strain, the slope of the curve that you see in the elastic region, it corresponds to the Young's modulus. Now if you, based on this understanding, you bring this understanding to the atomistic scale, you have force and you have distance between the atoms. And now when you consider the slope of this force curve, the force and the distance separating this atom, when you consider this plot and you consider the slope of this curve, that is df r by dr, it is nothing but, or you can fairly relate it to the slope of the stress strain curve, and both will lead us to the Young's modulus. So this curve here, that is the force experienced by the atom with respect to the distance between the atoms, the first derivative of the curve is nothing but the Young's modulus. So this is why we began with the discussion on, or began by plotting the potential energy curve. We became between the two atoms. With that understanding of the interaction potential energy between two atoms, we saw, or we translated that to force experienced by the atoms, and we had now we have a plot for the force experienced by the atom with respect to its interatomic distance, and based on that we saw, and by translating that force and interatomic distance to the macroscopic scale of load and elongation or stress and strain, we saw the slope for a marginal change in the distance between the atom. It translates to the Young's modulus, and when we then extrapolate that understanding, or based on that understanding of the macroscopic scale, when we translate that to the atomistic level, we end up with a relation that the first derivative or the slope of this force curve is nothing but the Young's modulus. Now this is our R naught, which corresponds to the absolute zero state, the equilibrium position of the atom. And now when we increase the distance between the atoms from when the distance between the atoms increases from R naught, this is possible when you increase the temperature. So when you increase the distance between the atoms from R naught, you would see that the slope at R naught, or the slope at the new position, say R1, will be less than the slope at R naught. So let me plot, let me write it in this way, that the slope of the force curve at R naught will be greater than the slope of the force curve at R1. Now this shift from the R naught to R1, because we have raised the temperature. We have raised the temperature and the material has experienced a thermal expansion. Now therefore the equilibrium position of the atoms is disturbed. So from R naught, now the atoms are separated by R1, and now when we consider the slope of the force curve, when you compare the slope of the force curve at R naught and at R1, we can see that the slope is higher at R naught and it is lower at R1. So that means that the E naught, which is the Young's modulus at absolute zero, is greater than that of Young's modulus at temperature, say T1, or rather at T1. So what we have done is we have related the first derivative of the force curve, and we have by relating or from the first derivative of force curve, what we mean by that is the slope of the curve. So based on the change in the slope of the curve, we saw that when you move away from R naught to a new place R1, we saw the slope of the curve decreases, and that would mean, since we have arrived at an expression that slope of the curve relates to the Young's modulus, so that would mean when you move away from your equilibrium position by virtue of the increase in temperature, that then translates to a decrease in the Young's modulus. Now there is another way of looking at the same effect of temperature on the Young's modulus. You can arrive at the same relation, that as you increase the temperature, the Young's modulus decreases. You can arrive at the same understanding by just looking into the potential energy curve alone. Now let us, instead of having our understanding from the force curve alone, let us try to have an additional or substantiate this understanding by looking into the force or the potential energy curve. We have seen that based on the slope of the force curve, with increase in the temperature, the position shifts from R naught to a new position R1. When you shift the position from R naught to R1, the slope then decreases. That means that Young's modulus decreases. So this is our understanding wholly based on the force curve and the force and the interatomic space curve. Even though this curve comes from the initial understanding of interaction potential, this relation or the effect of temperature on the Young's modulus so far has been confined to the force curve or the slope of the force curve. Now let us substantiate this understanding by just confining ourselves to the interaction potential. Now we can do that by again replotting the interaction potential again. So yeah, let me redraw it. So now let me try to focus more on the asymmetric part alone. So this is our interaction or potential curve with respect to the distance between the atoms. Now our equilibrium position is here. So this will correspond to our R naught. So this would be R naught. Now if I raise the temperature, what would happen is the material is allowed to, or the atoms of the material is allowed to vibrate more in the in this direction or the elongation direction, and less in this direction of coming close together. So because of the asymmetry, the atoms are allowed to vibrate more here and less here. And this is, let's just say, for temperature T1. And when I increase the temperature further, this would be, the vibration would be more intense, and this would represent how the atoms of the material would vibrate. Now what I have done is, I have considered two vibration at two temperatures. The T1 is greater than T2 rather is greater than T1, and the vibration at T2 is correspondingly higher at T2, or rather the vibration at T2 is correspondingly significantly higher when you compare to the vibration at T1. And of course, because of the increase in temperature, there is also a change in the interaction potential. But for this discussion, let us forget about the change in the interaction potential. Just concentrate on the vibration of the atoms. At T2, there is a larger vibration when you compare it with T1. Now what we can do is, we can plot this curve here, we can approximate this curve here by restricting ourselves to the particular temperature. Now what I mean by that is, we need to have a curve that just includes this region. So let me try to change the color here, let me get some become fancy. So yeah, I want to approximate the region of this whole curve. I don't want to consider this whole curve for the next discussion. I want to confine myself, restrict myself to a particular region of this curve, and I choose this region of this curve by from the vibrations of the atoms. So when I want to approximate the vibration of the atoms at T2, or the potential energy associated with the vibration of atoms at T2, what I will focus on is just this region. So I will focus just on this region alone, and this would be my approximation of the overall interaction potential at T2. Now if I want to do the same for, let's just say, T1, then I will just restrict myself to this region here. So I will just restrict myself to this region here in case of T1, and I will restrict, or I will expand my assumption to furthermore and restrict myself here for, rather, the red curve for T2. So what I mean by approximation is, what I end up having if I make this approximation, I will be having two curves rather. So there will be two curves which would look something like this. Let me plot. Okay, so this would be like, I would be having two parabolas that would look like something like this. So this is my potential energy approximation for T1 and T2. So instead of having a single asymmetric curve, I have confined myself to the vibration at T1 and T2, and then I have approximated the part of the curve that are related, that characterize the temperature T1 and T2. What I have done is, I have just focused on the part of the interaction potential curve which characterizes the temperature T1 and T2, and rest I have just approximated. So ultimately what I end up having is two curves for T1 and T2. So that would be like something like this. For T1 or for T2, it will be something like this, and for T1 it will be something like this. Of course, this will coincide at R or not. So yeah, so this is my approximation for T1 and T2. So what I have done is, I have approximated my potential energy curve. I have approximated my interaction potential energy for two different temperatures, T2 and T1, and T2 is greater than T1, or the temperature T2 is greater than temperature T1. Now the reason for doing this is, the reason for approximation of this curve will become clear when in the subsequent discussion, but here I want you to know, since our focus was just on the vibration of atoms at T1 and T2, it allowed us to approximate all the rest of the region of the potential energy curve, and we just focused or confined ourselves to the region of vibration. Now let us go back to our description of the Young's modulus, which we saw as the slope of the force. Now we have also seen that force is nothing but the first derivative of the interaction potential energy with respect to the positions of the atoms. And now when you bring that here, what you end up is the Young's modulus is nothing but, of course there is a negative sign here, but this is because of the convention. For this discussion, let us leave the negative sign alone. And like I said, this is not inconsistent. There have been works wherein this negative sign has been removed. You can look into such. You can just, if you want to look it up, maybe you can just search for the relation between interaction potential and Young's modulus, and you could find that there have been description of force wherein the negative sign has been removed. So for this, for the sake of this discussion alone, or for the sake of this perspective alone, let us remove the negative sign, and then what we end up with is the interaction, or the Young's modulus in terms of the interaction potential can be expressed as this. So what I mean by that is, the Young's modulus is nothing but the second derivative of the interaction potential energy. So now, having this description of the Young's modulus, let us look into these two curves. So now, these two curves, the difference between these two curves lies in this region. In this region, these two curves vary. For a given temperature or a given value of y, the mouth of these parabolas are rather different for T2 and T1. The opening of the parabola, the mouth of the parabola for a given y is different for the potential energy curves at T1 and T2. So what we have is two potential energy curves for two different temperature, and what changes is the mouth of the parabolas for two different mouth of the parabola that represents the potential energy curves. Now the second derivative of the parabolas is nothing but the mouth of the curve. You can get this understanding by just trying to plot a simpler parabolas. Like for instance, if you plot a parabola y1 as 8x square and parabola y2 as 40x square, you would see the mouth of the parabola y2 will be much more closer, or the parabola y2 will be much more sharper when you compare it with parabola y1. Let me reiterate. You can get the understanding of the relation between the mouth of the parabolas, or the sharpness of the parabolas, by considering two examples like 8x square and 40x square. When you plot these parabolas, when you try to plot it by any tool that of your choice, you would see that the y2 parabola is much sharper. The mouth of this parabola is much closer. When you compare, is much smaller when you compare to that of the parabola y1. So what is the factor that is changing here is just the second derivative. For the parabola y1, the second derivative of the parabola y1 would be 16, and the second derivative of the parabola y2 will be 80. And based on the change in the parabola or second derivatives of the parabola, the mouth of the parabola would change. So in this case, the y2 would be much sharper, or it will be the mouth of the y2 will be much smaller when you compare to that of the mouth of the y1 parabola. So to put it plainly, when the second derivative is higher, the parabola would be sharper and the mouth would be smaller. Let me reiterate, when the second derivative is higher, the parabola would be the second derivative of a particular parabolic function, the second order function is higher, then it means that the mouth of the parabola will be smaller and it will look sharper. And when it is higher, the second derivative is higher, that means the mouth will be larger and it will not be that sharper. So now the expression, now we have two parabolas each relating to two different temperatures. So the green one relating to a lower temperature and the red one relating to the higher temperature. Now, based on our understanding of the second derivatives and the mouth of the parabola, for a given y, coordinate y, we could see that the parabola pertaining to T1 has a smaller mouth, or it is sharper in nature. The parabola pertaining to T1, that is the lower temperature, is more sharper, or the mouth is more smaller when you compare that to the parabola at T2. So that would mean that the second derivative of the parabola of the potential energy function at T1 is greater than the second derivative of the interaction potential at temperature T2. So that would ultimately translate to the Young's modulus at T1, which is lower temperature, is greater than the Young's modulus at T2, which is the higher temperature. So we have now arrived at reached an understanding of the dependence of or influence of temperature on the Young's modulus. We have arrived at from two different perspectives. The first perspective was we formulated or we plotted a force experienced by an atom curve from our understanding of the interaction potential, and we related the force experienced by the atom to that of the stress strain curve that we see in the macroscopic scale. Because stress is nothing but involves load, and load acts as a force, and the elongation is nothing but movement away from the initial position of the atoms, we related this stress strain curve to the force interatomic distance curve, and we saw that the first derivative of the force is relates to the elongation, or the Young's modulus that we see in the stress strain curve in the macroscopic scale. And based on that understanding, we saw that the slope of the force curve translates to the Young's modulus, and any movement away from the equilibrium position that happens because of the increase in temperature would mean decrease in the slope, and that would ultimately mean that Young's modulus decreases. So this is our understanding from the force curve. And now we moved away from the force curve, or got a level up, and or moved a step before, and then we confined ourselves to the interaction potential energy. And in the interaction potential energy, we considered two temperatures: one, a lower temperature that is close to the absolute zero, and a higher temperature that is greater than the temperature T1 that is close to absolute zero. So we have considered T2 a temperature greater than T1. We have considered two temperatures, and we have approximated two potential energy plots for temperatures T1 and T2 respectively, and we approximated that based on the vibration of the atoms. So this is where we have approximated it. We have approximated two plots for interaction potential based on the original plot or the bigger asymmetric plot. We have approximated two plots by focusing on just the vibration of the atom at particular temperatures, and we saw the primary difference between these two plots were that one plot was much sharper when you compare that to the other plot, meaning the one parabola was much sharper than you compare that with the other parabola. When you don't want to use the term parabola, you can easily state that the potential energy curve at one temperature or the lower temperature was sharper when you compare that to the potential energy curve at the higher temperature. So you have two potential energy curves for two temperatures. The higher temperature potential energy curve, the mouth of that curve was larger when you compare to that of the mouth of the lower potential energy curve. Now, since the mouth of this curves or the sharpness of this curves depends on the second derivative of the potential energy, we were able to say that second derivative of the potential energy at lower temperature is greater than the second derivative of the potential energy at higher temperature. But from our understanding from the force, since the second derivative of the potential energy is nothing but the Young's modulus, we were able to show that the Young's modulus at higher temperature is, or lower temperature is greater than the Young's modulus at higher temperature. So that means as the temperature increases, the Young's modulus, which is the property of the material, decreases. So this is one of the properties, or this is the property that I want to discuss in this lecture, and we have arrived at this property or its relation to the temperature by beginning with our understanding of the interaction potential with respect to the change in the interatomic distance. So we began with the change in the interaction potential, and from that we were able to build the force, and even by confining ourselves to the interaction potential, we were able to show with the increase in temperature, the Young's modulus decreases. Now we can also try to arrive at an expression for it. I'm not much of a fan of this expression, but let us try to arrive at an expression for it. So this expression for the change in the Young's modulus can be written in the similar way we write for the thermal expansion. So let the change in the Young's modulus with increase in temperature can be written as something like this. So here the E naught is the Young's modulus at absolute zero. So there is a Young's modulus at a given temperature T, that's just marked by ET. Now ET means something different, so we'll just stick with E, and E with respect to the Young's modulus at the absolute zero, and we normalize it with the Young's modulus at absolute zero. This is should be proportional to T, but in the negative manner, that is, as T increases, this the Young's modulus at that temperature should decrease. Now we introduce a constant to get rid of this proportionality. So that would mean that we have a proportionality constant that is introduced, and the temperature that is governing the or rather the temperature that is governing or influencing the Young's modulus. Now usually when you talk about the change in the temperature, it will be delta T, but here we are not doing that. Instead of delta T, we will be normalizing the temperature with respect to its melting point. So what we now have is, we have now an expression for the Young's modulus at a particular temperature with respect to the Young's modulus at absolute zero, and that we have related to the temperature in relation we have related to a specific temperature T in the context of or with reference to its melting point. So when you rewrite this expression, so how ultimately you will end up with something like this. So you are E naught and now E naught alpha rather E. So this is how your expression, or how your Young's modulus changes with the temperature, and this temperature is with reference to the melting point of the material that we are speaking of. So in this lecture, what we have done is, we began by quantifying the influence of temperature on the coefficient of thermal expansion. We looked into our the basics or the factors that contribute to the thermal expansion, and based on that factors we built upon it. We saw that based on our understanding of the potential energy curve, we can then arrive at another property, that is the Young's modulus. We saw by two ways, by talking about the force acting on a system, and also by considering the second derivative of the potential energy with respect to the interatomic distance. We were able to at least theoretically show that the Young's modulus decreases with increase in temperature, and ultimately we will be winding up with this lecture with this expression where we are quantifying the change in the Young's modulus with respect to the increase in temperature. So I hope the flow of thoughts is clear here. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for your attention. We will build on this and think about many more mechanical properties in the upcoming lectures. See you, take care, goodbye.